Hey everyone, Matt Landfair here with Primary and Secondary. Welcome to Primary and Secondary ModCast. It is episode 192. We're going to be discussing evolutionary combat psychology. Today is April 28th, 2019. This is going to be a real cool discussion. This is something that, people discuss it online a little bit, and they kind of skim the surface. And if you happen to work in a field where firearms are involved, especially military and law enforcement, these types of things are discussed, but are they discussed to the point that they need to be? Some of the topics I really wanted to cover today, and we have the perfect panel for this. I want to talk about some Grossman stuff. I want to talk about preparing someone for an incident pre, during, and post mentally. I also want to talk about how to help people that go through traumatic incidents because of violence. For the most part, all of this is, there really isn't much of a script for today. This is going to be very much open discussion. This is also a topic that we've been wanting to cover for some time now. Unfortunately, the planets aligned, and we were able to get the perfect panel. So before we start up, I'll throw out some big thanks to some sponsors. Big thanks to Filster Holsters. If you're looking for an ambidextrous, near universal holster that's compatible with a Surefire X300U, Filster has the floodlight. So you have this floodlight. It's really more of an appendix holster. You can carry in the waistband 3 o'clock, though, if you want. Cross draw if you're really weird. Couple that with the Filster Flex, and you basically have a near universal system that allows you to carry additional equipment, and that includes like a tourniquet or a flashlight, spare mags, even handcuffs, along with your firearm, all along the appendix region. It's a really cool setup. Also, the Flex I found really provides additional comfort for me, and it also provides more stability because it seems to hold the gun in place a little bit more securely. And I think it's just because of the materials that are being used. Also, big thanks to Facts on Firearms. If you happen to be in the market to, let's see here, do another AR-15 project, if you're going to assemble one from parts, or if you need to replace a barrel, Facts on Firearms most likely has everything that you need. My favorite example, and I say it about every show, InRange TV did a What Would Stoner Do project. And essentially what Ian and Carl did is they figured out what Eugene Stoner did with the AR, and they applied modern materials and methods with it. They used a Faxon pencil profile barrel and showed pencil profiles really are not a bad option. The performance that it provided was, well, it was surprising for many because back in the day when H-bar was the thing, these pencil profiles are working out very nicely. Big thank you to Walther Firearms. This episode is brought to you by the letters PP and Q. And I happen to have my PPQ Q5 match right here. I have a steel frame that I'm picking up on Monday. We're going to be doing some videos with these guys. I'm excited about this. Basically, we're going to have a whole battery of tests. As a matter of fact, the panelist, John, he's going to be helping us out with this. We have a whole panel, or we have a whole battery of tests we're going to be putting these guns through. That's going to be exciting. If you happen to be kind of on the fence with getting a Walther, I recommend it. Well, let's see here. I pretty much have all their guns that they have provided to me to test out to see what I think. I've been very impressed. Specifically, the standard PPQ. Just out of the box, it has everything I'm looking for in a pistol. They have a really cool thing going on right now. Basically, if you want to get a Walther and you buy it, if you don't like it, you can return it within 30 days for a full refund. They'll pay for shipping. If you wind up liking it, you just got yourself a really nice pistol. A lot of people, and I'm going to have to agree with this, I'm saying this too, out of the box, the PPQ has the nicest trigger for a semi-automatic concealed carry weapon. Just a factory great gun. So check it out. Lastly, big thank you to our Patreon subscribers. It is the Patreon subscribers that are helping us basically provide this type of content, not only the podcast, but also all these pistol trials we have up on deck that we're going to start filming next month or in June, hopefully, maybe even July. If you go to patreon.com/primary and secondary, you can help support the network. And that helps me pay all the bills and get more stuff, more ammo, more stuff for us to do and shoot and blow up. And it's a good time. So my background's in law enforcement, been doing it for about 20 years now, over 20 years. Work for a small agency. And the benefit of working for a small agency is I wear a lot of hats and I get to do a lot of things. I'm not just focused on traffic, or I'm not just focused on calls, but I'm focused on doing pretty much everything. So kind of a jack of all trades. Law enforcement's been a wonderful career for me. And combat psychology is something that's been discussed, and people have recommended, oh, you got to read Grossman. And it's been a regular theme. And up until a couple of years ago, I didn't hear many people push back about that and say some things counter to that, and actually read people and hear people be a little bit more hesitant to recommending Grossman. And I'm excited to have this discussion. This is going to be a good time. I suspect, sadly, because this isn't guns and gear, it's not the sexy stuff, it's not going to be as popular as others, but it is going to be something a lot of people probably need to listen to, especially if you carry a firearm. And that doesn't have to be just because you're carrying a firearm professionally. It's anyone that's carrying a firearm. If you're carrying it to defend yourself, this is good stuff to know. So let's go to intros. Varg, why don't you start us off?
Varg Freeborn, run my training company, One Life Defense. Basically do, firearms and some light combative topics and a lot of mindset heavy stuff. So my background is obviously criminal violence, both sides of the fence. And I spent a lot of time in that world, 25 years in that world, a lot of experience there. And then after leaving that, I went on and participated in a lot of training in all types of, combatives and fitness and gunfighting, and through working in the industry, got invited into some law enforcement level training. So had a broad spectrum of experience on both sides of the fence there. So that's the perspective I bring. For this particular talk, we'll draw on some of my lethal force experiences and talk about some of that.
And then how's the book doing?
The second book is actually, I've got the notes open right now because this is relevant material, and I know I'm going to be taking some notes. So I'm just taking them right into the notes of the book. So
cool.
It's coming.
Very cool. And your first book is still #1 on Amazon?
I looked today. I think it's #3. It was #1 almost all month in April. And that was month 15 or 14. So that's pretty good. And
that's specifically fitness. What's the category?
Martial arts is where everybody who writes anything that's combatives or gunfighting related pretty much goes in that category. So you've got, Mark McYoung and Roy Miller and Tim Larkin, and you're competing against all the guys. So it's a pretty heavy category in there. So it's pretty cool to be at the top of it for so long.
Very good. Good. John, I think it's your turn. Just this once.
I'm coming through?
Yes.
Okay. My name's John. 26-year veteran. I retired last July. Did 16 years on the SWAT team. 5 years of that was as a sniper. And I'm here to discuss my encounter with a shooting that was improperly handled. So I hope I spread some light on that for you guys.
Yeah. And it's also nice that we can have these discussions, especially now that you've been able to retire. We've been able to talk about things that it was kind of hush hush. And now we can talk about that. We can talk about steps that happened afterwards on for you personally and also professionally. And I think that will be a good guide and really helpful for people to consider for the future.
I hope I can help.
Oh, yeah. And Matt.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Larsen. I was a Marine infantryman for 4 years back in the Reagan era. I was a Army Ranger for 18 or 19, something like that. And after I retired, before I retired, I helped create the Army's combatives program. And after I retired, I was intermittently a combatives instructor and then a contractor around the world. And currently, I'm the director of combatives at West Point, where we train all the cadets in several different classes and whatnot. And I've also been pursuing specifically my education in evolutionary psychology, specifically the evolutionary psychology of combat for the last several years, because of all the things that I had read about the psychology of combat didn't make any sense in the light of my experiences in combat. So yeah, that's about it.
What would you say the biggest misconception is that you hear from cadets that you interact with when it comes to combat psychology?
Well, the cadets are just learning. I don't think they learn the fundamentals of psychology. It's West Point's a pretty good school, and they have to learn quite a bit. And we have a really top-notch psychology department. They mostly teach psychology from the perspective of leadership and organizational psychology. And so I'm a little bit of an outlier because I'm, not focused on that. But I would say most of the misconceptions I hear are just out in the tactical world. I think that almost everything that I've heard in the tactical world about the psychology of combat is, basically nonsense. And what spurred us to have this was we started discussing Grossman, and I would say, Grossman loses the science on page 1 of his first book. He didn't at the time. He wrote that book 20 years ago, and on killing I'm talking about, and it was a good book for its time, but its time has passed. And so I think that we can hopefully get the discussion a little bit beyond that and start talking about what we really need to do. First step would be understanding what makes people tick.
So in your opinion, then, if this is step 1, what's making people tick then?
Well, let's say this. So in Grossman's, the first thing he talks about in On Killing is that human beings don't have a fight or flight mechanism. They have a fight or flight posture or submit mechanism. And he says that that's most likely because humans have an inherent reticence to kill other humans. Okay, so when I read that, it didn't make any sense at all to me. And I think a cursory glance at history shows you that human beings have no problem killing other human beings. How many human beings are going to be killed by another human on the planet today? It's going to be many. So that doesn't make sense at all. So also from the perspective of, well, let me back up a step. So I used to live in Africa. When I left running the combatives program for the Army, I went as a contractor for several years. I ended up running a security company based out of Zambia, and I was working all around Central and Southern Africa, everywhere from Mozambique and Burundi and Central African Republic and whatnot. And it was a lot of fun, so I wanted to stick around. So I was trying to look for other ways to stay there. So I did a bachelor's degree in natural sciences, specifically because I was thinking about working in conservation over there. I had a client who was in charge of reintroducing rhinos into the country of Zambia. So a bunch of cool things like that, right?
That's very cool.
Yeah, Africa's really cool, right? So with that being said, when I studied a lot of the, if we take natural sciences and just imagine for a second that everything in nature dies a horrible death. Everything. And there's no exceptions. Everything in nature dies. It's most likely going to be eaten alive, or it's going to be killed and then eaten right after it was killed. And that's just the way nature works. And so every being in our 3.8 billion years of the history of life on this planet, all of our ancestors lived through that. So whenever I found, people were saying that the trauma is somehow causing us, it creates an illness in us, that doesn't make any sense on its face. So, how is it that all of a sudden human beings are different than every other species of animal on the planet in the history of the world, in that nature, in that we have trauma like that, or that it somehow disables us, or So that doesn't make any sense at all from a evolutionary perspective. So then back to the Grossman's fight or flight, posture or submit idea. There's a grain of truth in that, biologically speaking, right? So the grain of truth is in male hierarchical fighting. So imagine when in social species, what Darwin figured out was that there was procreation was endless. You could have an unlimited number of offspring potentially, but that resources were finite and therefore we'd have to compete over them, right? So what that really means in practice is not only are we competing for food, we're competing for the opportunity to procreate, like competing for mates. And so in social species, what that means is that the males compete and form hierarchies, and then they do that for the purposes of controlling resources, specifically females. So that's where the posture or submit idea comes from. So imagine if you've listened to Jordan Peterson, he said this quite a bit, but lobsters, for example, if you take two lobsters who've never seen another lobster in their whole life, you put two male lobsters in a cage, they will go through the same ritual every time. And that ritual is that they will first posture. They raise their claws up. They're like, try to see who the big one is. And if one of them is much bigger, the smaller one will scurry away. They've established a hierarchy, and then there's no violence. If, however, they're about the same size, they wrestle. They grab each other by the claws. They try to flip each other over. If one of them can flip the other one, then the one that lost scurries away. They've established a hierarchy. Same deal. No more violence. If, however, that doesn't happen, then they fight. But when they fight, they try to snip each other's eyes off and legs. They really try to hurt each other. And so when that's going on, they're probably both going to receive damage, right? So that means lobster number 3, who's just watching this fight happen, is going to probably win because they're both wounded and he's going to come in fresh. So that's why they have this mechanism not to hurt each other. And evolution is a very conservative system. Things are they stick around for a really long time. Okay, so imagine that same mechanism. You can see it in many other species. In fact, most other social species. So you can see it in crickets. You can see it in sea lions. You can see it in many kinds of birds. You can see it among two tough guys at the bar or at the UFC. It's all male hierarchical fighting, just trying to establish their position in the hierarchy so that they can get the girls, right? So that, however, it is only some species. And what I mean by that is there are some species above that have adopted a different way of doing business, and that is male coalition reproductive strategies. So imagine wolves, chimpanzees, human beings. What we do is we form coalitions of males, and then those coalitions compete with other coalitions. So within our coalition, we do exactly what the lobsters do. Two wolves within the same pack, they posture, one of them might submit, they fight in a non-lethal way, etc. But between the two packs, now they have war. And they try to kill each other. Okay? The difference being is they still don't want to get hurt. So the way they conduct war is that they do raids and ambushes and things like that, because they try to win in such a way that they're not going to receive any damage. So they try to, 5 wolves on 1 is what they're trying to do all the time. Does that make sense? Pardon me. So that's actually what our basic underlying psychology is the tendency to only fight outside of our group when we know we're going to win. And you can see that not only that method of fighting among wolves and chimpanzees, because they fight almost the same way, but also in hunter-gatherer humans. So if you look at the methods of war that go on between wolves, they're the same as the methods of war that go on between, hunter-gatherers. So when the When the Arapaho were fighting the Sioux, that's what they were doing, the same methods. And it gets more sophisticated than that, but really that's the nature of it. So with that being said, if that is what our basic biological history is, why do we have something different? Well, so let me give you the sort of shortened version of this, sort of cliff notes, if you will. Imagine why a wolf pack is the size it is. So the reason is because you'd think it would be for efficiency in hunting, right? But that's not actually true. So when they reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone, they have collared 3/5 of them that have since that time. So it's 15 or 20 years now they've been watching these wolves, so they know exactly what they do all the time, right? So the optimum number of wolves for hunting is 4. That means if you have a 5th wolf, then they don't get any more elk or whatever they're eating than the 4 would get, and they don't get as much to eat because there's more of them. Okay, but if 5 wolves come into conflict with 4, the 5 will win on a predictable rate, and so they keep the 5th. And if there's a 6th, the same, and if there's a 7th, the same. But you can see as they get larger and larger away from 4, they get less and less to eat. So they grow as big as they can within the nutritional abilities. So when they get to be like 29 or 30 or 35 wolves or something, then they no longer get enough to eat, and then the pack will split up into 2 packs, and they will go back to war against each other, whatnot. You get the idea, though, right? So optimized for war, but limited by nutrition. So that's the same for chimpanzees, and it's the same for human beings. And interestingly enough, or hunter-gatherer human beings, I should say. Interestingly enough, as sort of an aside, there's a science called paleo pathology that can predict can show what the death rates from different causes were in the past. And the death rates among wolves, hunter-gatherer humans, and chimpanzees from conspecific violence, which means killing each other within the species, are all just about the same.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So that being said, what happened to humans then was 10,000 years ago, we figured out farming. So if you can farm, then all of a sudden you've gotten rid of this nutritional problem. So your coalition is no longer limited to, 30 or 40 or 50 or 100. Now it can be 1,500 or 15,000, or, like in America today with 300 million people. Okay, so we have the same psychology, only now we have 300 million people. Now what that changes is that all of a sudden you can have specialization. So the percentage of people involved in the fighting becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so imagine what percentage of Americans in today are involved in violence or in war between 2 groups. That number's amazingly small. So therefore that changes what's going on in everybody's brain in a sort of in a predictable way. So I should sort of explain about morality, or what psychology says about how we develop our morality. There was this guy named Piaget many years ago who figured out by watching children that children play 2 types of games. And these games are how they develop their ability to get along with other people, which is the same thing as their morality. So what I mean by that is this. So imagine the first kind of game they play are competitive and cooperative games. So think about when their kids are playing a game of hockey, right? Are they competing or are they cooperating? Well, they're actually doing both, right? So they're cooperating on the larger scale because they're all cooperating on the rules, but they're competing within the rules. Okay, so that's kind of a microcosm of how we get along in society, right? We all sort of agree on what the basic rules of society are. And as long as you stay within those rules, then we're all competing with each other, just like those wolves are within their pack to set our hierarchy so we can, get the girls or whatever. Okay, so if you step outside of those rules, then you're in the penalty box, right? So that's basically the way society works. It's just like a big hockey game, right? So that's one type of game. The other type of game are role-playing games. So imagine two little boys playing, cops and robbers, or playing Army, or all the games we played as little kids. I'm sure they play different games now, but you get the idea. What's going on there is that we are not, like, imagine when you're playing Army as a little kid and you're going around as a soldier, you're not mimicking some soldier that doing all the things he did. What you're doing is imagining yourself as a soldier. So you're acting out the abstract of what it means to be a soldier. Okay, so when humans gain cognition, over the course of the last 100,000 years, at some point we gained the ability to be able to admire people, other people. Okay, so like, that guy's the strongest guy, he's the successful guy, whatever he is. We end up admiring him, okay? And so that is when we gain the ability to think in abstract like that. And that's what rules our world. We think in abstract all day long. I mean, think about it. Numbers are abstract, So once we can think in abstract, then we can start imagining the qualities that somebody would have that are admirable. So that's sort of the Piagetian model of how we get our basic morality. And then this sort of a update of Carl Jung's basic idea. Jung, if you ever read Joseph Campbell's or heard of Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces, right? Every society in the world has hero stories. Well, what Jung said was that these are inherent human qualities that admire these traits in people. I would disagree with that a little bit. What I would say is we all, through our experience in life, admire the people that we admire, or the type of people that we admire. This is not only people we know, but books we've read, movies we've watched, people that other people have told us about. And we develop these ideas about what it means to be a good person or a heroic person or whatnot. And if you imagine a society and you ask, everybody across a society, what are their traits, then you sort of come up with the idea of what it means to be the ultimate best person. Okay? So that's a society's iconography. And you can look at different societies and see what they come up with, right? Imagine the Vikings had Odin and Thor, and
the British have Doctor Who.
Yeah, very similar idea, right? Much like Thor. And but you can also just without getting into the metaphysics of it, but you can put that on what they think of their religious icons as well. Buddha or Jesus or whoever, people are imposing these ideas on those religious icons. And they're a reflection of what's going on in those people's lives or what they've heard and whatnot. So in a hunter-gatherer society where everybody is involved in war, just as every wolf is involved in war, that's going to be a warlike, or it's going to be somebody, who's good at war. Imagine if you're a hunter-gatherer and you wouldn't have any use at all for a Gandhi, because if you did, then your tribe is soon going to be wiped out. There's no room for pacifists in that sort of world, right? So in a society that's closer to war like that, you have this warlike iconography. Okay, so remember we were talking about how larger coalitions, because of farming, allowed us to have specialization. Smaller and smaller percentage of the population involved in war, which means the iconography shifts and becomes more and more and more pacifist over time. So now in psychology, there's a thing called moral injuries. They're actually just discovering as one of the major causes of what we term PTSD right now. So moral injury is when you do something or see something that conflicts with your deeply held beliefs. Okay? So imagine now somebody grows up in a peaceful society. Their parents were regular people. Maybe their dad was an electrician, their mom was a nurse. They go to school, their teachers are regular people, their peers are all the children of regular people. They have their high school guidance counselor, they have their preacher, they have whoever, all the influences in their life. And then away they go to war, and all the things that those people valued, all the ideas that they had about human conflict turned out to be bullshit, because war is not different now than it is between wolves. If you ever look at what happens when chimpanzees fight, they brutally kill each other. They beat each other to death and chew each other and tear their limbs off. It's not less brutal than modern war, and so, or modern conflict of any kind. And so that's their normal. And that's the normal in a society that is confronted with war all the time. It just becomes not normal as you get farther and farther away from that natural state of humanity where we're all involved in it. That makes sense to you?
It does. So what you're saying is, if the United States was much more like a more warlike society, PTSD wouldn't be that much of a thing then, because people are more conditioned to process it and accept it and to understand it.
That's basically what I'm saying. But it's also true that we do not fight the way hunter-gatherers fight anymore.
Yeah.
Imagine when 20,000 guys came out of the woods on Pickett's charge and they were walking across the field. There's nothing in our basic psychology that says to do that, right? I mean, think about that for a second. Whenever they walked out of the thing, and draw the picture in your mind. They step out of the woods. It's a mile across the field. The cannons of that era, they're shooting a ball that's as big as your fist, and it's coming at 2,000 feet per second or something similar to that. That means you can almost see it, or you probably can see it as it comes across that field. Bounces once or twice, takes out 20 guys. Why does everybody keep walking? Because there's not a man on that field that wants to keep walking, right? Not the commander, not the lowest private, nobody in between wants to keep walking across that field. But why do they do it? Well, they do it because of what we were talking about earlier about with status. So they are not by themselves, right? They're amongst all their peers. And if you turn and run, the two primal human fears are fear of death and fear of loss of status, right? That's why people are afraid of public speaking. They don't want to get up in front of embarrass themselves, right? We run into this in the combatives world all the time. What percentage of people are afraid to engage in hand-to-hand combat training that's realistic, knowing full well they might get embarrassed? Well, that number is huge. It's nothing to do with being injured or anything. It's everything to do with loss of status, right? So that system of morals that pushes across that field has the idea that we would fight like that. It's dealing with that reality, right? So even imagine we talked about specialization within the society. Think about specialization within the service. What percentage of general officers or colonels and above in our Army today have experienced prolonged combat at the platoon level? That number's exceedingly small, right?
Yeah.
So even within the military, the people that we think, the 1% of the people in America who are involved in the fighting, the people in that group who are actually involved in the fighting are even a much smaller subset. So the morality is not dictated by that group of people who are involved in the fighting. It's dictated by the rest of them who aren't, even within the military. So therefore we fight in ways that are nothing to do with our psychology, right? I mean, we would still have PTSD even if we were a more warlike society, because of that would still be going on, because of our size of our country and size of our coalition.
So did you say, based on experience, if someone's in combat for 20 years, some Afghani been fighting his entire life, would you say he's much more normalized to this, where he's not going to have quite?
Yeah, if you look at, there are studies done about the PTSD among the child soldiers in Africa that shows that they don't really have much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I would say is, if you look at the biology, you could conceivably draw a taxonomy of combat experiences based upon what happens within nature. So imagine, for example, so human beings, not just human beings, animals, all animals deal with threats along a threat imminence continuum. That means that when the threat gets closer, you deal with it differently, right? So imagine we're two gazelles, we're out in the grass, and we smell a lion. What will we do? Well, our brain activity will stay in our prefrontal cortex, and we will try to outsmart the lion. Maybe we move into the short grass so that he can't ambush us, right? But if that lion jumps out of the weeds at us, so in biology, that's called a circus strike, right? A near strike. So when the circus strike happens, the brain activity does not happen in the prefrontal cortex. It goes from the hypothalamus straight to the autonomic system. So meaning straight to your muscles, basically. And so that's what we humans call panic, right? So with that being said, we're driving along as soldiers in a convoy and we get ambushed. It's not really much different than what those gazelles are going through, right? It's actually the circus strike mechanism. We're going through the exact same thing. You know, what is going on chemically in our brains. So compare that to what's going on for the lion. Right? So the lion, he's just hungry, right? He's like going to the restaurant. So when he goes out hunting, he's thinking with his prefrontal cortex the whole time. Even when he's in the middle of the fight, he's still thinking about it. So imagine I'm a lion. I jump out and I grab a buffalo, right? And I'm trying to take this buffalo down and things are not going my way. Well, then I'm just going to intellectually decide, this isn't worth it, and then back off, right? Okay, so that's an entirely different thing going on mentally in the same fight with the two different actors, right? Entirely different brain chemistry, different portions of your brain being activated. It's completely different. It's also, by the way, completely different than what was going on in the male hierarchical fighting that we were talking about earlier, okay? So compare then the soldier driving along the convoy gets ambushed with somebody who's in a unit like the Rangers or some counter-terror unit who are basically going on raids every night, right? Or the SWAT team that's going to take down crack houses or whatever they're doing, you know? They're on the hunt. Their brain activity is much more like the lion than it is like the gazelle. See what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So if you start to, if you look at what the DSM says, that's the Bible of psychiatry. Basically, it's a list of symptoms. It's not sophisticated enough because psychologists and psychiatrists don't know enough about combat to know that those are two different experiences. So, but they are completely different, and therefore it stands to reason that you would expect different things going on, right? So there's a bunch of factors. So we talked about the moral injury thing earlier. You can, if you had a realistic morality, if you had a morality that was imbued in you by your peer group and that really jived with the realities of what goes on in combat, and if you understood the difference between what happens when you're, the hunted versus the hunter, and pretty soon, and those are not the only distinctions, but you get the basic idea. Pretty soon, you would have a much more sophisticated idea of what's going on with people mentally, emotionally, etc.
Varg or John, do you guys have anything to add or have any questions?
Well, from my from what he's explained to me there, it is the hunt for me was the exhilarating part for it, as far as SWAT teams and hitting houses. So I can relate to that. But you know, it was all about the pack, as he speaks. You know, the well-being for the pack, and that's, you know, what we live for on that is the well-being for our other guys. So with that, you know, it made a lot of sense to me, especially after I started getting to therapy after my incident. And she explained to me pretty much the same thing that was just explained. And it helped a lot. It's just too bad that it's not taught at a level before our guys end up in that combat situation, and it helps them understand. It took 8 years for me to actually be sent to a counselor, a psychiatrist, but the damage was done by then. I wished it was done a little quicker.
You know, there's a lot of the things that they have taught over the past many years that they have later found out make things worse, that were taught as the ways to treat, you know, people who are having issues. And I'll give you a good example. So they used to think that when they first came up with PTSD just after Vietnam and that era, they thought the idea of having everybody, they used to call them rap sessions, where they would sit around and tell their stories to each other. And Grossman talked about that too, like the idea that we would be warriors at the end of the day, sitting around the fire, talking and telling our stories and whatnot, that they thought that would be therapeutic. But the science since then has kind of shown that every time you relive the incident, it's actually, you know, embedding it more and more. It's making the memory stronger and stronger. So it doesn't actually help. You know, it makes it worse to go through it again and again and again, like telling the story, like as what they said. It's not like you offload it. You really just relive it each time you tell it. And I'll give you sort of an example of that. Like, imagine your earliest memories from your childhood. Most likely, we don't really remember those things. Most likely, our family told those stories, and we absorbed them and eventually started telling them. And pretty soon, it's a memory, even if it wasn't the way it really happened, or even if we don't actually remember it, we've sort of created it, right? And so a good way to think about it is, and this kind of leads into what you're alluding to, what we can do to prepare for combat better, mentally as well as physically. So I teach it at in the Department of Physical Education, and so all the guys, I work in a building with 40 guys with PhDs in physical fitness and various aspects of that. Well, in physical fitness training, there's a thing called the psychomotor learning process, which is a 3-stage explanation for what we all know about how we learn physical skills. Imagine if you were trying to learn how to play the violin, what would happen? Well, first step would be somebody would show you, or you'd look at it on YouTube or something. So that's called the cognitive phase. And that's when your brain knows it, but it's got to tell your body what to do, right? So the next phase is called the associative phase, and that's when you do 1,000,000 repetitions to make it where you get past that portion. And the last one is called the autonomic phase, which is when you've moved that skill set into your autonomic brain. So, for example, when a hockey player's skating down the ice and he's handling the puck, what's he thinking about? Well, it isn't skating, because he's done so much skating that he doesn't have to think about that anymore. It's automatic, right? So what's really going on there is that your brain cells are creating pathways. They're like, imagine like a table where you have a flat table and you have a ball on that table, and you score that table once with a knife, the balls may run into that groove whenever it's shaking around the table. But if you score that thing 1,000 times, pretty soon you've got a canyon on that table. The ball will roll into that groove on almost every occasion whenever the table is shaking around, right? So that's what's going on physically. I mean, that's what is going on mentally to make the physical actions happen. Well, memories are the same. Every time you go through it, you're scoring that memory deeper and deeper and deeper into your brain and making that pathway mainstream. And so we can, on the one hand, know that as far as, talking about our incidents don't necessarily help. And on the other hand, we can know that because that's what makes your smooth draw stroke happen when you're under duress, right? Because you've done enough repetitions of it, you've created those neural pathways so that it becomes autonomic action. Does that make sense to you?
That is exactly what my counselor said to me. She said that I needed to take that. She called it a stream of water and referred it to, once that groove is worn by the water, it's always going to follow that pattern.
Yeah.
And until you work it another way to look at it in a different view, you'll keep reliving that over and over and still have those same doubts and feelings until you actually move that path to a different mindset.
Yeah. Another thing to think about that too is, so we were talking about moral injuries, and one of the things that causes them is our own actions. And that's a misnomer. It's not our own actions. It's our own expectations of what we will do. So imagine I'm sure with both you guys being around law enforcement quite a bit, this will ring a bell, but if you get on Bluetooth or one of these things and watch all the gunfights that guys get in, one of the common things that happens is a traffic stop or something, walking up on a car, and then the guy in the car draws down on him and the gunfight starts like that. So the cop is completely surprised as he's walking up to the car, and all of a sudden he's in a life and death fight. And what you see in those videos is almost always the first reaction of the cop is to almost panic and move away from the threat, and as fast as they can get out of the line of fire, etc. And then what you see is they get themselves together, and then they come back on the bad guy and engage, right? Usually that's the way it plays out. So to sort of stick with the theme of biology, imagine the lion jumps out of the weeds at a herd of Cape buffalo, right? And so the biggest, toughest, bravest Cape buffalo in the herd will panic, because that's that circus strike mechanism we were talking about earlier. It doesn't even go to your prefrontal cortex, your modern, human cognitive brain doesn't even get the information. It goes straight from the hypothalamus right to your autonomic nervous system, which means you don't even think about it. You just react, So if we've been taught that we're, big, brave, tough guy, and then that happens to us, that's just one example of how we could lose our idea of who we are because that happens. Meanwhile, it's completely predictable phenomenon, right? And so nobody thinks the Cape buffalo are not brave, because they're going to come back and fight off that lion once they get there. So if you confronting the lion is the mark of bravery, right? Not the not having that panic moment. It's the same thing with those cops. They get themselves squared away, half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds later, and now they're back on task. And so it's easy to, some guys beat themselves up about their reaction, because it's not what they thought it would be. but it's just because we had an unrealistic view of what it will be. And what we really should be judging, even in ourselves, was, did we come back on it? Is that, you know what I mean?
So I'd like to jump in here. Is that a?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So everything that's being said so far pretty much it goes right in line with everything that I've talked about for a while. And, anybody that's read my stuff or listened to me talk about these things, that, that my approach is to break it down into two basic components. You've got your orientation and your conditioning level, right? And within your conditioning level, you have physical skill mastery and you have physical fitness, which is what he was talking about when he brought up the psychomotor learning process. That's physical skill mastery, reaching the end of that process. I don't know if you went that far, but the end of that process is autonomy. So when that is met with physical skills performance going into a high stress situation or a situation where real-time information needs processed quickly, cognitive skills are not being wasted on, or cognitive processing power is not being wasted on skill performance. And so that squares that part away. And then the physical conditioning part is extremely important because it determines your physiological capabilities in terms of delivering the skills that you've practiced and also maintaining your self-control and being able to function and have sustainability and stamina in a stressful situation, whether it's physical stress, psychological stress. The more fit someone is, the quicker they recover from, physiological symptoms like raised heart rates and things like that. The longer it takes to get you elevated, the quicker you recover from being elevated. So this is all extremely important stuff going in. That's all part of your conditioning. But the orientation part is what's interesting to me. I suffered a lot of the things that guys talk about, when they talk about traumatic events and post-event traumas. And, I had to work all that shit out for myself because I happen to be from a group that doesn't get any support. So going back and looking at that to try to help other people who may have to face that situation, I determined that there are certain things that changed as time went on in my experiences where you become inoculated, for lack of a better term, towards those type of stresses, and you can actually maintain a level of clarity and make good decisions and achieve what I call self-control. So I've came to term the achievement of a combat mindset in my mind is to maintain self-control under all conditions, right? That's the primary, lowest common denominator goal that we're trying to achieve in that. I think that all of those other things are built off of clarity and decision-making. All of that is based off of self-control, because once you lose control, whether it's through an automatic process, which he brought up when he talked about the predatory imminence continuum, that these automatic, drives that are built into our DNA, you let go to those, you let go to panic, or you let go to confusion or not having an answer for a situation. All of that are examples of loss of control. And I've seen guys crumble with this type of, get into a situation and they don't have an answer for it, and they just have white space, and white space typically will fill with negative mental images, right? And then that's how self-defeat begins. When I looked at the changes that take place in people in order to become more assimilated to that, operating in that environment, I determined that your orientation is made up of your value system, your cultural inputs, your experiences, your confidence. All of those things are what drives your decision-making, your conscious processing decision-making. And if you're maintaining self-control through having skill mastery, confidence, capabilities, and physiological sustainability, then you can take control of that decision-making process by controlling your inputs. So if you've got someone who's been taught their entire life that violence is bad no matter what, and you should never take a life, never, then when they're physically violently attacked, obviously they're going to have a hard time responding appropriately. Or if you have, a situation, I was just reminded of, the inoculation phenomenon just a couple weeks ago. Me and my daughters were riding on the interstate and we witnessed a fatal crash. A car, the truck in front of me blew a tire and he panicked and he couldn't control it. And he tried to skid it across 3 lanes of heavy 75-mile-an-hour traffic, ended up sideways in the ditch, which put him airborne doing somersaults, and everything came out of the car. And this happened right in front of us, and my 2 teenage daughters were with me, and they were horrified, and it snapped me back to that time when, before I was, used to this type of, this part of humanity. Right. And so as I witnessed that happen, my daughter asked me, she says, why didn't you react to that? Why didn't you move the car or, steer or something like that? I said, well, I didn't have to yet. I was processing the information coming in, and I'm not going to make a correction until there's a very clear problem to make a correction for. Like, you just don't start doing things because you panic. You just don't start doing things but that's what a typical person will do. They'll panic and they'll just either freeze or they'll run. Like he had brought up the thing about the officers running back and then catching themselves and coming back. Like, that's how most people will respond. And that's an orientation problem. Your values, your inputs, your confidence, your experience, all of those things drive that decision-making. And if you're not consciously processing that information coming in as it's coming in and making clear decisions through self-controlled, then you can't possibly be making decisions based on information coming at you. And you have to hit this point where you begin to reprogram yourself through training and through, other forms of, and for lack of a better term, indoctrinating yourself with something new. And what happens with that is you take guys and you put them into prison, right? And a very interesting transformation takes place over several years, right? And in the first couple of years is a very critical time. The younger guys are, the better they adapt, right? The older guys don't adapt as well. And when the younger guys adapt, they adapt very quickly. And it happens in a way that, so for example, I've been in situations where we'll watch a guy pretty much get taken out, like right in front of you. Like, you're sitting there and all of a sudden some bad things start to happen. And there's, deadly force situation happening right in your presence. Right. And in that situation, 2 hours later, you will find us playing spades somewhere, because it's, clean it up and let's go on with our lives, because that's exactly what this environment is like. So when you talked earlier about going in with a proper expectation of what your orientation is built for the environment that you're going to be operating in, then you are better suited to maintain that level of self-control and make those decisions with clarity, and then return to normal, which is I think the part that we need to start talking about more, the return to the new normalcy that you'll experience, because it won't be the same. You're not going to be the same as you were before you entered into this world, but you need to develop a new normal that you can operate at. And when it's time to go to work, you go to work, but then when it's not work time, you come back down. And that's how, that's that gray area between, the moral damage, the PTSD, and the being able to function part, right? You have to come back to a new normal that, some shit just happened. It may have involved me, it may not have, but it's human tragedy according to your moral guidelines, your cultural inputs. You've experienced a human tragedy. And so from that point, you have to go back and say, if I don't either change the way that I see that culturally or change the way I see that according to my values and put a selective system on that, then I'm going to experience fallout from that. Right. So I think that all kind of goes in line with what he was talking about there. So that was pretty interesting, I thought.
I think that's right on the money, and I think it brings up a really interesting another line into why people have problems. So imagine the guy who is in prison for years and then gets out, or the soldier who goes away to war for a year and then comes back to the States, and compare that to the person who's going on patrol. Let's just say maybe a member of the SWAT team or something that's going out and having frequent combat missions, if you will, and then get off shift and go home. So one of the things we found in the Army was that the guys who were in the National Guard or the reserves or something have a much harder time, because when they come back from their deployment, like their unit all just sort of dissipates and they go home and they're back in the world they were in before. And now they have all these adjustments that are maladaptive, and no sort of group that they're part of, or, it's because of the nature of the long period of time in this different environment and then trying to come back to another environment. I would imagine that people who are in prison and adjust, as you were mentioning, have similar sort of issues whenever they get out and they're back on the street, and all of a sudden those adaptions are not, they're maladaptions at this point. And that it might even be, like active duty soldiers have less of a hard time, because when they come back, they're typically with all their friends, all going through the same things. My second wife was a journalist, and she was a combat journalist, and her experiences of combat were going over by herself or with a photographer and being over there for several months, and then coming back to the newsroom where no one else had been. They were just carrying on with their regular life. Meanwhile, she was in these life and death circumstances on the regular, and suddenly, back in the office, typing away at the computer. And I think that's, if we can go back to the biology again and think about it, like the gazelles are out there. One of the gazelles gets taken out by the lion. What do the rest of the gazelles do? Well, they're back to eating grass. They know it's a dangerous environment. They're just back to playing spades again because it's normal for them. And they, that's a different circumstance than if they were, domestic, and then all of a sudden they were thrown into that environment and then back to being domestic.
I'll agree with you 100% that, the same thing happens with, anybody that's been in any type of environment for a prolonged time. It could be prison, combat, or a high stress, repetitive job, like, a busy SWAT team in a metro area or something like that. And one of the things that I try to caution people about when I'm, when I'm talking or teaching on the subject of lethal force is that part of it. And I think that your preparation for that change and those adaptations need to be made during the training for the initial event as well. I think they have to be integrated. If we don't integrate the training for the adjustment afterwards into the training for the main event, I think we're doing a huge disservice to new people that are heading out into those dangers. And I'm very interested in hearing more of John's story, because I think that was that has a lot to do with what we're talking about. But the lack of that element in the training bothers me deeply. It makes it sometimes difficult for me to participate in the industry, because I see a glorification of guns, gear, and violence, and in a very, very small understanding of the actual dealing and how it fucks your life up and takes you in directions that you're not actually prepared for. And I think that, us guys that have had experiences and have had to come back from that and then deal with the adaptations and the maladjustments and all of these things should be stepping up to the plate and helping new guys going out into the field to at least be thinking about these things and put it into a perspective where their cultural inputs and their value systems are beginning to be adjusted before they have the event. I think that's probably the key. If the adjustments come in shock after the event, it's damaging. I think if we can start to install it before the event, then I think we're going to have a much higher success rate with guys being okay afterwards.
I can only speak from my own experience. I think the only real formal stuff that I ever received discussing this was really only in the academy, and that might have been one day, it might have been 2 days, and it was a very one-sided discussion. And comparing my experience, and I haven't been anything that's been overly traumatic, sure, dead bodies and stuff like that, but nothing on the same lines as you guys. But I can definitely tell you, basically, you're not prepared for anything. At least when I went through. And you take a new guy on a call, and you just expect, okay, you're gonna cope with this. You're gonna take it and live with it. And if you don't, you're a wuss and you're worthless. And then, of course, and we'll poke and prod and make fun of you also, depending on how you react, and if you wind up sticking around, then it sticks with you for a while. John?
So with that, I think maybe it's a good time for me to probably tell my story.
That would be great.
Okay. So back in 2008, we received a call of an individual that was quite upset. He was threatening to shoot everybody. My 2 patrol officers arrived at the scene and were immediately engaged by the suspect. Shot several rounds. They retreated and called out SWAT. They perimetered the house, got everything set up. I got there. I believe I was the second guy there because just before this all happened, I had dealt with the kid or the individual just before my shift ended. His brother wanted him kicked out of the house. His parents didn't. Explained to him that, I can't remove him from the home unless his parents wanted him to. Individuals were very upset. The kid downstairs would not speak to me. When I say kid, he was an adult. But when I went home, I just got out of my uniform and received a SWAT page. And when they gave the address, I knew immediately who it was. I dealt with this individual several times before. So I kind of had a personal thing with him because I knew the guy and was not looking forward to going because I knew what the outcome may be. So as I responded, they put me on point and I set up on a corner of a shed. And the team was behind me, and I was calling out what was happening. As we sat there for probably a good hour, 2 hours, just trying to get him to come out. We had him on the phone with negotiators. As the negotiator spoke, he finally says, all right, well, let me go talk to my mom for a second. As soon as he did that, he come out of his basement window, and I called it out. We have movement in the front, and he come out with 2 Mac 11s in his hand. Stood in the window well for a second, looked around. I don't think he saw anybody at that time because we were all pretty concealed. And then he started crawling out of the window well. As he did that, he started running, and he saw one of the guys on perimeter and immediately turned around. At that point, he said he's got 2 weapons. We strong-walled the guy. We had about 12 guys in our group at that time. And he saw us, and he had the Mac 11s up like this in his hands, and he kind of stopped to slow trot and then looked at us. And by that time, the closest guys were maybe 7 yards, 10 yards away from him. I was approximately, on my part, I was the furthest guy out, and I believe I was about 20 yards out. So at that point, the individual, he kind of looked around for a minute, and he saw the cops, and then his face went blank, like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. As soon as he did that, the guns came down. The moment they came down, we engaged them. When those guns come down, 6 of us responded in 1.8 seconds and fired 18 rounds. The reason I know this because one of the patrol guys left his camera on and his windows down and caught all the audio with all of our verbal commands when he'd come out. And so we gave him the chance to put him down. He chose not to, and the 18 shots were shot, and he went down. From then, they separated the shooters, took us to hotel rooms separately, and isolated us. Then the county come in and took all of our clothing. They took all of our weapons. They did a bullet count in every magazine. At that time, I thought I'd only shot 2 rounds. Was later informed that I'd shot 4. The one thing I do remember during the shooting was I did not get a visual tunneling like a lot of guys do. I got an audio, and my ears shut down, except I heard the buffer spring twice. And that's all I heard was just the sound of the buffer spring recoiling within the gun. And that's why I only heard it twice. That's why I thought I shot twice. So after that, they'd taken our stuff, and then we're told not to talk about it and send us home. The following day, they brought us back to the scene and had each one of us walk through what we did and videotaped it. And that was pretty much it for a debrief. And they sent us all home. So I got 4 days off because I come from a small department, 10-man department, but I was attached to a larger department of, at that time, it was like 70 guys. And their SWAT team said they'd like an additional guy from my department. And of course, I wanted to do it. But after I got sent home and had those 4 days, I did not have any contact at all from my administration, none at all. My wife finally got pissed off and called the chief and kind of ripped him a new one, asking him why hasn't he reached out? Because, at the time, I had the moral issue at that time. I was raised that killing was not a thing to do. You never kill someone. And that's what I was struggling with at the time. It did change eventually, but the moral part of it was just eating me up. So after that, I got sent back to the patrol in 4 days, and we had a bank robbery 4 days later, and I was the guy on duty. I was the only guy on, and it was a Logan City bank, but it was right on the border of my city. So I responded. As I got there, the suspect come running around some businesses, and I was the only guy there. So I jumped out, and we were told he had a gun at the bank. Jumped out, and I drew down on him, and the whole time I'm thinking, if I have to shoot this guy, I'm going to be crucified. So I had huge doubts, and there was huge hesitations going through my head there. I didn't see the gun. So as he ran past me, I pursued him on foot, shot him with the taser malfunctioned, and then I ended up having to tackle him. But mentally, that was so stressful on me because what had happened 4 days ago, I was really considering, do I want to continue doing this? I did continue with law enforcement, had several other encounters. We had a call out where the husband had supposedly shot his wife. We didn't know at the time. As we stacked up on the door and entered, he put the shotgun to his chest and put a hole in himself right in front of us all. And again, none of us got any counseling for any of this stuff until I retired. And then when I retired, the alcohol got really bad. And but prior to that, I'll get back to that, is my chief finally, after 8 years, decided, let's send you for evaluation, psych eval. They sent me and he said, yeah, you're free to, you're good to work, but I want you to go some counseling. So we did counseling. And after that, I retired, drank till I was stupid, and decided to go through rehab. And through rehab, they discussed a lot of this with me, and the counselor really broke it down for me and gave me some other paths to follow. But I sit back and I think, why wasn't this done, after the shooting? And even more so, why wasn't I told when I was getting into this? And even more so with the SWAT team, you have a chance of taking a life. They don't prep you for what's to come after, and maybe some things you need to deal with or know what's going to come ahead, where it was just all brand new for all of us. And one thing that I did notice that in other shootouts as well with the Valley here, every guy takes a shooting different. They handle it different. Some just plain give up. They don't want to do it anymore. And there's the other guys. It didn't even faze them. This one guy told me, he says, it was a mad dog that needed to be put down. So I kind of looked at that as callous because I was dealing with the moral issue. And again, I really would like to see the issue with the academy and even with our military guys. This is what's going to happen. Prepare yourself for it. This, get your ducks in a row before you actually have to do this, and physically and mentally prepare yourself. The physical part was easy. It was almost mechanical. I had trained doing this day in, day out. I shot thousands and thousands around. I was, not to brag, but I'm a pretty good shot. And they drill that into you to be able to take care of the situation. It's just not after the fact. So I'm glad you guys are talking about this, and hopefully we can give some of these younger guys something to think about as they continue with their careers.
It's easy to talk to a new guy and present them with situations and for them to hedge their bets or to.
I have a question, Matt.
Yeah.
John, prior to this experience that you had, where was your mindset? Because you obviously were SWAT. You were obviously doing the job for a while. You were going on raids, preparing to do this, training for it. What was your mindset about if you thought about if the event came that you would have to take someone's life? What was that thought process like, and how do you think you had prepared for that before?
My thought process before was mentally preparing myself to actually take the shot. It wasn't anything after. It was, can you go through with what most people can't? That is what I really drilled into myself. And, being young as I was, I thought I was invincible and a badass. So you really don't think about the afterwards. You just think of, all right, when I get in this situation, I'm going to do what I need to without looking stupid. It's just like he'd said, it's about, for us, it was, all right, you don't want to look like a pussy. You want to be the guy out there that can do the job and go home and not have to deal with anything after. But that was the hard part for me, was the after.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we seldom examine the moral influences in our life in the light of what are their experiences in life. You know, as I said earlier, you grow up with normal parents, normal peers, normal teachers, normal preacher, all the people in your life that are your moral influences that sort of create what sort of moral animal you're going to be. And most of them never have anything like this in their life, and they don't have any idea. And their morality is not informed by what the world is really like. When you were talking about it, your experiences afterwards, my experience is similar in one regard. Like I thought that I used to scoff at the concept. In fact, you know, I've seen quite a bit of combat, and I used to just laugh about it, like it didn't bother me. And only in retrospect did I realize, you know, what an alcoholic I was for many years. Like that's like exactly what I did, was I just self-medicated my way through it. And just, you know, I remember in those years when I was pretty frequently involved in combat, I didn't go to sleep at night ever without drinking, because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to sleep. And I didn't even think about it. It was 5:00, time for a whiskey, you know, and it's just the normal thing. And I think where we can do people the most service, because there's a lot of good information out there. Like you said, you were a good shot. You'd shot thousands of rounds, and so the physical skill portion you just executed. But we haven't examined closely enough, I think, our morality and how we generate it. And this is coming from the perspective of 4 older guys looking back, you know, but really the guys who are, most of the people are experiencing this when they're 19, 20, 21, 22, when you really haven't had a chance to, your morality just is what your society you've grown up in gave to you. You know, we're immersing our children in it right now. You know, my youngest is 20 years old, but he's a soldier already, and he went to a regular school, regular teachers, regular preacher, the whole bit. Hopefully I've been able to influence him so his morality is more in touch with what the real world is, but that's a deficit that we can hopefully fix.
You know, my experience was very similar, except for the fact that I felt a little bit more on the callous side due to my culture and values growing up was very much driven in that direction. I won't go through my story all over again here, but, you know, lethal force violence and losing family members to violence and things like that were very common to me. By the time I had my heavy experiences, that mindset was already built very solidly. But I will say this, it's not like it didn't come with a cost, because I think one of the hardest things for me to deal with was the fact that not only after doing what I did to another human being, you know, on multiple occasions, but also I witnessed a lot of things. I witnessed a couple of guys get killed. You know, that all of that, what that I think did for me was, and I had also, like you, thought that I was a badass and I was invincible, and especially I'd been through all this shit and, you know, I grew up this certain way. And I was like, nothing's going to fucking phase me. And, you know, if I determine somebody's a piece of shit, then, you know, it's just like putting down a dog. And where it got me through the back door was it introduced me to my morality in a way that I hadn't considered yet. And it made me feel fragile because I seen how easily a life could be expired. That's what fucked me up. Like, and then I would have these vivid, super vivid dreams of being killed in the same exact way that either I had done to someone else or I had watched happen to somebody. And I would have these insanely vivid, real dreams that, you know, I would be expiring through the same means. And this turned into a combative sleep disorder that went on for several years. And I would wake up and just destroy shit, defending my life in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. And 20 years later to this day, I still have, it's not as bad, but I'll catch myself standing in my hallway ready to fight. And I was like fucking sleeping 5 seconds ago. And it sucks because I got to get up in the morning. I got to get shit done. And now my night's fucked and I can't sleep. And you know, and it's still a cost, you know? So even with that callous preparation that I had, there's still a back door that it found its way in. And I think that, you know, so I don't think that beating guys in the face with a sandblaster is going to prepare them, right? Like, I think there needs to be a deeper level of reassigning values and culture has to happen for this to work. What John experienced was a cultural problem. That was, he was culturally formed to morally feel the heavy burden of that. And that was purely values and culture based. And I think that probably the majority of those problems comes from values and culture based. Like the other part of it, though, like what backdoored me is the mortality part. That's the other part we need to. I don't think guys are, you know, I don't think you're aware of it until you see it happen, and you're like, holy shit, we are fragile. Like your shit can be ended very, very quickly and very easily. And once you realize that from firsthand, at least observation, I think that also requires a major adjustment in the mind for them. And again, you know, creating these adjustments before the event, I think is way less damaging than after an event.
I think that it's interesting that in light of what you just said, you know, children who've had traumatic childhoods are much more likely to suffer from traumatic stress disorders than people who haven't. So what you said about it's not about beating them in the head with a sandblaster or whatnot. Yeah, it's not, because when we were talking earlier about that, the way our brains work to make those connections, so we move physical skills into our autonomic nervous system. The same exact thing is going on with responding to fear, responding to being scared. So, you know, we had this conceit in the light of the Vietnam era when we thought we had shell shock in World War I and then combat fatigue in World War II, and we thought that we had figured out that those were wrong, and that it was something else. It was the moral, or it was the just the effects of combat. Well, it turns out that you go back and look at what went on to those guys who were like in the 8th Air Force or something, flying over Europe for mission after mission after mission. It really was combat fatigue, because those fear pathways were getting so well constructed that fear was the natural thing all the time for those people. And that's, you know, my experience in dreaming is similar, in that I have, you know, not so much anymore, but back when I was still involved in that stuff on a regular, I would just wake up and just remember how scared I was in the dreams, you know, like the fear you've never felt except in combat, and wake up and remember that fear. And that's those pathways there. You know, you create a new one when you get scared like you've never been scared before. And if you get that again and again and again, so imagine, for example, we've got guys now who've been in our the Ranger Regiment, and it's like that. And their war experience over the last 15 or more years has been 6 months back in the States and 3 months over, and the 3 months that they're in the war zone are 3 or 4 or 5 raids a night, every night for 3 months, come back to their wife for 6 months, then do it again. And they've got that, on a 9-month cycle for 15 years. Those pathways are well developed. And so that's a different sort of, that's what I was saying earlier about a taxonomy of PTSD or a taxonomy of issues. Those guys aren't suffering the same moral issue. They have an entirely different issue, which is just as they described in World War II. It is combat fatigue, too much of that, because they're adapting to it. But that doesn't make them adapted when they get back in the regular civilian society where everybody's living a peaceful life and it's time to go get ice cream with your kids,
So how does the book on killing fit in all this?
I think it loses it on page 1.
Yeah. Because, we're talking about real topics here. And then I remember however long it was released, people were recommending that you got to read this, and this is going to get you ready. This is going to provide a foundation for what you're going to be experiencing if you're put in a situation where you're going to be using deadly force or be involved in an incident.
Well, there's a couple of other topics that he discusses in the book that are worth mentioning. The most famous one is the firing ratios that he got from SLA Marshall, which, that was one of the things that I thought was baloney. My experience tells me if anybody's not shooting at the enemy, it's most likely because they're scared and so they're hiding, or they didn't think that their weapon is effective enough to counter the fear that they're feeling. Like my one little rifle in this big fight might not make much difference, but if I stick my head up, I'm going to get it blown off. That makes a whole lot more sense than some sort of inherent moral reticence to shoot people. And the other one, and that Grossman backs that up with evidence from people firing high in combat. And I think that every infantryman who's ever been on an ambush line knows it's natural to fire high, and it has nothing to do with not wanting to kill the enemy. It's just when you lay down, your gun shoots up more, So that's an important one. And then, I think that the other one I would say is he is his sheepdog analogy, which I think needs to be addressed. I don't actually care for that analogy. And imagine this: why do the sheepdogs protect the sheep? Well, they don't do it because they care about sheep. And so they do it because they care about the shepherd. So that works as a Christian analogy. You can protect the sheep because you love the shepherd, or you want to please the shepherd, and that puts you just like the sheepdog. But the thing about sheepdogs is the shepherd never lets them around the sheep when he's not around, and the reason he doesn't is because the sheepdogs will just screw with the sheep, right? So they don't care about sheep, and they're always thinking they're separate and apart and different and better than the sheep, and maybe that's not the best analogy. I like the Cape Buffalo analogy I mentioned a little bit earlier. Why do the bulls of the Cape Buffalo herd fight the lions? Well, they do it because they love the rest of the herd. They are a band of brother warriors fighting off the lions, and they are doing it because they love each other and they love the cows and the calves. And that's I think a much better analogy. And if we sort of, that puts each and every one of us. In my training, I like to use the phrase "the warrior in the room," and that means remember the church shooting in Texas when the guy across the street was an NRA instructor, and when he heard the shooting went on, he went and grabbed his rifle and came back out and engaged the bad guy. That is exactly what we need, is that every one of us who's capable is that guy. Every one of the bulls is ready and willing to defend the herd. I think that's just a better way to look at it, and it goes right back into our morality of it. What is the bull's role? The bull's role is to defend the calves and calves. There's nothing immoral about the bull fighting the lion.
So can I jump in on the Grossman thing real quick?
Please.
I'm not a fan at all. I'm not a fan of his positions on the things that Matt just covered, and definitely anybody who's read my book knows I tear the sheepdog thing to pieces. Like, I absolutely shred it. And one of the things that I'd like to point out about the sheepdog thing is that inherently there is a built-in victim mentality in that, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is that people are constantly, who use an analogy like that, are constantly talking about how violent and terrible and evil and, more violent and more experienced criminals are than you are. And you create, they're not a different species than you. We are all human beings that have the same tools, capabilities, and resources at our disposal. Your enemy is the same as you. And this is very, very important to understand, because as you're struggling with these issues like values and culture and input and self-control, once you master these, then you understand everybody from Colonel Boyd to back to Musashi and Sun Tzu, who talked about destroying the enemy's thought process, getting inside of his loop, getting inside of his thought process, deceiving him, making him lose his self-control. You cannot achieve that in another human being until you have mastered that within yourself. You have wrestled with yourself and you have learned how these things work internally. Then you can create chaos inside of another man once you have tamed the chaos inside of you, because you understand what creates it, right? And when you look at somebody like they're a different species, you're completely missing the mark. You and him, you should be looking in a mirror. And I'm preparing, when I'm training to fight, I'm training to fight me. I'm training to fight me in an alley someday, right? So I need to understand that when someone comes against me, they're not a different species. They're not some mythical creature. They're another human being, and they have the same problems that I have. They're trying to solve them in a different way, but eventually we're going to come to the same conclusion and try to solve them in the same way on each other. And so there's similarities there that need to be addressed in order for you to be tactically prepared for that event, right? And so that sheepdog thing lends itself to draw people completely away from real thinking like that. It takes you to this mythical like land of, in the new book I read about the mythos, when I think that's what Matt was talking about, iconography, like mythos, the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that inspire us, and the Jungian archetypal symbology and stuff like that. You get down the wrong road with that shit, and you're actually taking yourself in the wrong direction. And that's exactly what that sheepdog thing does. It takes you away from what you should be thinking about. They are not that different from you. They may make different decisions than you, but you need to understand how culturally and in terms of value systems, they arrive at those decisions for you to be able to do what you need to do. Or you're going to be, unfortunately, in John's situation and dealing with a very, very hard situation afterwards, or, in a worse situation with some of the guys that are in the ground that couldn't make the decisions, that didn't train the skills, and then end up on the losing side of it. And outside of that, everything he said about SLA Marshall's work and, the shooting high and all that, when he says stuff like humans aren't wired to kill each other and shit, I absolutely knew for sure he didn't grow up where I did. Because, that was a whole different experience for me. So I don't know what world he's coming from, but it's one that I don't think it's realistic for the material that he's writing about and what we're talking about. And plus two, back in the day, he used to, if you go back and find his old bulletproof talks, he really talks shit about civilians carrying guns, like big time. He used to be law enforcement only, law enforcement military only. And he would literally talk in derogatory ways about civilians with guns. And then I guess one day he opened the Cool Club membership up for $80 a ticket and everybody could get in. But yeah, stuff like that, but in terms of the book and the sheepdog thing, that's my stance on it, man. I think that's, it requires deeper thought than that.
Should probably mention, that the evolutionary psychology of different portions of society is that there's a connection between the actions people are willing to take and their status. And so sort of cross-culturally, if there's a place where there are a group of low status men, in other words, they don't have social status, they're much more likely to resort to violence if there's not another way to achieve status. So imagine, for example, that the way if you're a kid that grows up in the poorest part of town, how can you be the guy who gets the girl, the big car, etc.? So you see the ways that we offer up as the right answer are do good in school from the time you're 5 until you're 22, just be a model citizen, and then you too could be an accountant or some other thing like that. Or we give them up, be a musician, be a baller, or be violent. And so the people who are given those choices are much more likely to choose the violence answer, because guess what? It works. Those guys get the girls in that part of town, the violent guys. And so if you compare that to the guy who grew up in a higher status, portion of our society, that's the much less likely to resort to violence. If you're the one, growing up and your dad was a doctor and you're definitely going to go to college, and your life of a big house in the suburbs and a beautiful wife and 2.5 kids and all that is pretty much assured, that guy is not going to resort to violence just because of where his status is in society. And what that means is if you're one of those guys who grew up in there and then you end up, in some sort of circumstance, you have to know that that's the case. You have to know that you're dealing with people who are quicker to resort to violence just because of where they're at in society. It's just a natural thing. It doesn't make them, better or worse people either. That's back to the wolves and sheep analogy, which I, once again, don't really care for. But the interesting thing on that, just so everybody kind of knows the history, Ron Don Vito first came up with the wolves and sheep analogy as part of the line system in the Marine Corps. He had a whole bunch of great sayings. He would say that, when he saw big people lifting weights, he'd say, look, wolves are not afraid of big, muscular sheep, and a bunch of other stuff like that. But, and he would say, I hear you, I see your mouth running, but all I hear is bah, like just as a way to make yourself into a wolf as the good guy. And that is much more useful, I think, than adding the sheepdog into the mix. And, as I said earlier, sheepdogs don't care about sheep.
So in everyone's experience then, what would be some methods or resources you could provide to someone that's looking to get into something, whether it be carrying a firearm for their own personal protection, or they're looking into going into the military or law enforcement? What are things people can do to prepare themselves?
Well, I would say the at the base level, you build a warrior ethos by in two ways. Number one is you have to have fear inoculation. You have to be doing activities that force you to manage fear. That could be jumping off the high dive. I mean, imagine this. Why does the Army send 20,000 people or something a year through airborne school? It's not because we think we're going to infiltrate that many people behind enemy lines with parachute assault techniques. It's because it's scary. Why do we make everybody rappel in basic training? I was only in the infantry for 22 plus years, and the amount of times that I rappelled operationally remains at zero. So, but we put everybody through it in basic training because it's scary. So that's step one. You have to have training that is scary and forces you to manage your fear. And that's the first thing. And then I would also say, look, examine your morals, examine where they came from. If the people that are your influences don't know about the real world, and by that I mean don't know about the harsh realities of violence in the real world, then perhaps their moral paradigm isn't right for you, isn't going to give you the truth.
John or Varg, any insights?
I was trying to see if John was going to say anything, but here's what I'll say. I think that, first of all, you need to listen to stuff like this and become aware of this problem before you become aware of the problem after the fact. That's the key, right? So becoming aware of it beforehand, I think, is probably the biggest step. Like, a lot of training, like what John mentioned earlier, that prior to his event, to summarize what he said, his thought process basically stopped at the shot. Like, he was prepared to take the shot, and he was thinking that when it comes down, I'm going to take the shot, I'm going to do what I need to do. But then there wasn't nothing after. So I think recognizing that problem first of all, and then, look for resources. I'm not, I'll shamelessly pimp my own book here, but I think it's a good resource, and that's an introduction. The second book coming up is exactly what this whole discussion was about tonight, and I will go super in depth to all the different stuff. And there's a big breakout section on Boyd in there, and that I am really trying to be academic about, which is hard for me because I like to be raw. But I think that finding, new sources of information, I think, are where it's going to be. If you're looking at stuff that's 20 years old, I don't think they were where we're at right now. And so I think look for new sources of information. The fear inoculation, like Matt talked about, that, force on force stuff and things like that. It'll take you quite a bit. It won't take you all the way. And there's a lot of variables that cannot be utilized or introduced in training, no matter how realistic the force on force is. But it'll do a lot for the average person to get in there and get some of that fear. And make sure you don't wear too much clothing, because you need that pain consequence, and stuff like that. But I would think new sources of information, force on force training, sparring, and really, honestly, work on adjusting your values and your culture before you are forced to, is probably the key.
Varg, I agree with you entirely on that. The biggest thing that I'm seeing nowadays with our new recruits coming in is they're all about the image. It's not the job itself. They want to, be the guy that's on television. They want to be the guy that, saves the day. But when it comes time to that force on force training, they will bitch and moan because it hurts. And, they don't quite grasp the need for that kind of training. Some of the guys I get down at the range when I have to teach them, they say, just get us qualified so I can go home. They're not looking at improving themselves and helping them to have to deal with it when it comes along. They just look at it as, just get me qualified so I can go home, and because I'll never have to deal with this again. I won't ever have to shoot anybody. But then that one time comes along, especially in our valley, we maybe get one, maybe two officer shootings a year, if that. But all these new kids are coming along thinking it'll never happen. And then you have the kids that are coming in from the military. a lot of those guys are prepared to do it, and you can really see the mindset from the military recruits coming in to the citizen that just got out of college that wants to wear a badge. So it would be nice that they do address the issues you mentioned and reevaluate their moral beliefs and take that into consideration. And it would be nice to have a part in the police academy that addresses that in itself, so they do have time to think about it. And because I've actually heard some people say, if it comes to it, I won't take the shot. I'll let them shoot me. And it just pisses me off. And I think you have no business being in this job. I've had officers on my department that will not carry around in the chamber because they say, what if someone takes my gun away? And it's just baffling to me. We need to get the mindset into this newer generation coming in to be prepared for anything that happens, instead of just coming across as, this is a glorious thing. The Law and Order show that finishes up the case in 1 hour. But again, that comes with the early stages of training.
I'd like to offer one last piece of caution at the towards the end of this discussion. All the things that we're talking about happen naturally for the criminal. And Matt touched on it earlier about people that grow up with that that orientation towards violence, because violence becomes the answer. Sometimes it's the only answer. I was that kid. I grew up in that world where we didn't have status, we didn't have money, we didn't have power, we had a bad name. All of the odds were against you, but the only thing you had was you smash a fist in somebody's face and you get results. You get a ball bat, you get bigger results. You get a gun, now you're talking. Right? Now we're making orange juice, right? So, the orientation, the values, the cultural inputs, the experience and confidence, which is two things we didn't touch too much on. Experience and confidence are the biggest inoculators, right? So these guys have this by the time they're 19. You got, the kind of guys John just talked about being in the academy that either don't want to get into a shooting or don't believe they're going to get into a shooting. And then you guys out there that are 19 that have been cracking skulls and dumping rounds into structures and vehicles for several years. And so, they're making those adaptations and they're developing those, that inoculation to fear and stress and the ability to make decisions under pressure and things like that. That's absolutely real in that world. I just had a talk with Steve Fisher about that today, and we talked about, I described a couple of, midway through stabbing somebody 23 times where I was calculating moving the stabbing target over a couple inches because I was hitting shoulder blade, and I knew it was, losing effectiveness there. So, this ability to adapt and create this combat mindset and have clarity of thinking and be strategic and be, present in the situation and observing that real-time information, that's happening in the criminal side. That's definitely happening. So that's just another little, urgency report to put on that to say, hey, this is very important for you because your enemy is getting ahead of you here.
I think I should mention before we end up that I've spent the last 15 or 20 years as the combatives guy for the Army, and that is what led me into studying psychology of combat. And the reason I say that is because the major battles in trying to get a realistically trained force are cultural and psychological. And what I mean by that are, imagine why do we not have realistic hand-to-hand combat training, close quarters battle training in most organizations? Well, it's because people are afraid of the ego issues we were talking about earlier. They're afraid in the realistic training they're going to be embarrassed, and that's the cultural issue you see in the Army. The Marine Corps is the same way. The more experience, the more longer somebody's been serving, even in the better units, you don't have any better. You have only slightly better training percentage of people who are doing realistic training in hand-to-hand combat and those kind of anything that involves the potential of being embarrassed than you do in regular units, because the egos are even greater. And in the way those cultural issues play out in law enforcement are, imagine we're talking about this, we're addressing individuals, but how does the training lifetime go of most people in law enforcement? Well, they come in and do a really hard school at the beginning of their training where they learn a lot and they might do some great training. And then they get out of the force. And then what is the institutional training that's going on, and what are the obstacles? Or how many police forces in, law enforcement agencies in the United States have a physical fitness expectation or test that you have to? Well, they don't. And how many of them have realistic ongoing training? Well, they don't. Individuals do, but not the institutions, because there's all sort of cultural obstacles. Everybody's an hourly employee, and they have workman's comp, and they have 1,000 different people, a large percentage of people fighting against all of those things, and that's at least a significant enough portion of the problem that it needs to be addressed. And we need to say that those are the people who are the enemies of the actual cop out there on the beat. Yeah, they might be trying to make his life easier in the way that he doesn't have to work those extra hours or get those bumps and bruises in training, and he can have that extra hamburger, but they're not helping him out. That cop who's overweight, hasn't been to the pistol range in 3 months, and hasn't done any hand-to-hand combat training since he was, except for maybe the PPCT or the Monadnock or something silly like that. Those people who are limiting that, they're not doing him any favors, because he's going to be the one who finds himself wholly untrained, wholly unprepared, not physically, mentally, emotionally, and it will be their fault at the end of the day whenever bad things happen to him. As much as it is the bad guy, it's those people fighting in the culture to stop the real training.
Our legal representation posted in the chat, and he said, this was a good observation, public schools are running the all violence is evil violence narrative. Our kiddos may not go to war, but if they do, they're going to have a moral struggle, just like what John described.
It's interesting that the psychiatrists that came up with the name PTSD were part of the anti-war movement in Vietnam, and at least part of their motivation was to show that war was bad for you. But I think that's absolutely not the truth. But what is bad for you is the unrealistic morality. War can kill you. Don't get me wrong on that. I'm not an advocate of war, but war is normal and natural. It's human. It's part of humanity. And so as long as that's going to be the case, if we're preparing our people poorly for it, we're doing them a disservice. And anybody who tells somebody that all violence is immoral, pacifism is the moral choice to let your sister be raped in front of you so you could feel superior. It's a silliness.
So are there any topics any of you guys want to discuss before we end?
I think there's a host of them, but we probably should come
great.
back and revisit it.
Yeah, I'd be all for having multiple episodes just focusing on this and sequels to this.
Yeah, I would just say, my day job is training hand-to-hand combat, and by that I mean, who wins the hand-to-hand combat in the battlefield is the one who has control of the weapons, and think about why that is such a case. Why does West Point demand that every single cadet learn about hand-to-hand combat before they graduate? Well, it isn't because we need a whole bunch of lieutenants who are really good at hand-to-hand combat. So it's actually all about warrior training and mental training, and that if we take the rest of our training with that in mind, what's going on whenever you're doing all those draw strokes, putting all those first round hits into the A-ring, practicing changing magazines, those things have an effect on you, and they have an effect on you that is going to change what you're doing and the rest of your training as well. In the Army, there used to be this bifurcation between what we called combat MOSs and non-combat MOSs. If there were ever a more baloney concept in the world than a non-combat MOS in the Army, and I don't know what it is, because that's the people whose weapons don't work and who don't know first aid and get lost because they don't know land navigation, because the mindset told them that stuff wasn't important. And that is absolutely all psychology and inherent in what we're talking about.
Well, that's a great discussion. And yeah, I do look forward that we can continue this. So then let's see if you guys have final thoughts, and then also make sure you plug anything that you feel like plugging. Varg, final thoughts, anything you want to pass on, anything you got out of this?
Well, first of all, this is the first time I've met John and Matt, and I appreciate meeting you guys. It was good to be in the discussion. And I wanted to say that I really appreciate John coming out and telling his story. That was an extremely heavy story, and I think it's super valuable. I understand the reliving the worst day of your life thing over and over. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I super appreciate that. I think that was a very key thing for people that are going to watch this. But I'm good with, you know where to find me. I'm on the internet, Varg Freeborn. Just look me up and you'll see what I'm doing. I got stuff going on.
There aren't too many.
You'll find me.
Not too many Varg Freeborns.
Yeah. No, pretty easy to find.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, John, I would also like to say I appreciate hearing your story, and I think that the insight and wisdom that your journey shows can be very helpful to a lot of people, myself included. And I can't wait to read Varg's new book. Sounds like it's right up exactly the sort of thing that I'm interested in, and I want to hear more of your insight, Varg. I haven't heard you say a single thing tonight that I disagreed with, so that's kind of remarkable. And Matt, thank you very much for having me on.
John?
Well, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to come and share my story. And I surely hope that what I have given to the individuals tonight can take something out of what I said and use it in their careers. Prepare yourself and stay strong with your training and your mental conditioning as well. Thank you.
Cool. Well, big thanks to the panel. Again, wonderful discussion. This is going to be one of those podcasts that I suspect will be passed on, shared. Some of the things we discussed, unfortunately, it's not discussed enough. And it's stuff that can affect people's lives long term. And at the same time, it also can affect them. This discussion can help people at least be prepared, to at least some degree. Big thanks to our sponsors, Filster Holsters. If you're looking for slim appendix holsters for pretty much every mainstream firearm. Filster has them. Facts on Firearms, pistol barrels, rifle barrels, AR-15 parts, you name it, they have them. Walther Firearms, if you buy one in the next 30 days, actually this whole thing expires June 30th. If you buy one, you have 30 days to figure out if you like it or not. If you don't like it, you can send it back for a free refund. Most likely you're going to like it and keep it because they make good stuff. The PPQ series is an outstanding firearm. Big thanks also to our Patreon subscribers. Go to patreon.com/primary and secondary. Help support the network. Also help support all the stuff that we're about to embark on. A lot of videos. John's going to be included in the videos. We're going to be shooting a lot of guns. We're going to be doing a lot of sciencey things. As of right now, we have Carl from InRange who's going to participate. We're crossing our fingers that Dugan can make it. It's not looking like it's going to happen, but we're really hoping. Our stable of firearms expands. There might even be an XD at some point added to the stable that we're going to shoot up and maybe destroy. But yeah, no idea what we're going to be doing next week. You can find us at primaryandsecondary.com. We have a forum. Please use it. It's so much better than Facebook because we can talk about stuff. We can sell stuff. We can do all kinds of good stuff that we can't necessarily do on social media, on Facebook. And it's all controlled through primary and secondary. So a lot more freedom. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I think that's pretty much all I got. So I'll talk to you later.